kind of home is Earth going to become for today's children when they grow up? The author of Generation Dread, Finding Purpose in an Age of Climate Crisis, Britt Wray, joins us now with more on how to cope. Good morning to you.
Hi, good morning. Good to be here.
So this is something that you wrote because you were dealing with a lot of eco-anxiety, and it was kind of overwhelming, and you had decided, I can't have children. They're not going to reach adulthood.
Well, not quite, but I was questioning whether or not it was a wise thing to do, given my work as a science communicator, ingesting all the grim information from scientific studies, lack of effective action, and it produced a lot of grief and anger and anxiety. But the fact that many young people now feel like they have to prevent suffering by bearing the cost of not getting to know their own children due to the climate crisis.
And it's the more I read the book, the more I realized that we talk almost every day about a different, unprecedented climate damage, and it's almost becoming like, okay, that's just the news of the day now. Whereas I found with the pandemic, when that happened, everybody at the height of the pandemic was talking about nothing but COVID. We're not doing the same with what's happening to the planet.
No, we're not, and it's unfortunate because it does demand that all-out response, global coordination, and treating it as the emergency that it is. We've been hearing about climate change for many decades, and it's been slowly getting worse, and we aren't responding to it because it's just this frog boiling in the pot kind of saying that we're aware of, right? And it's getting worse, more dangerous, threatening our communities. Now it's externally so obvious that it's dangerous to us in our lifetimes that it's producing this overwhelm of emotions, which is why I argue that this is ultimately a good thing, because these emotions can produce the inner clarity and the purpose to act and bring it into that realm of treating it like an emergency that it now deserves.
Because instead of just shutting down and thinking that, well, it's going to have to be government that's going to have to do something, or the big companies are going to have to start doing something, you know, as people have it's led to shutdown of people.
Yeah, it leads to this kind of psychic numbing. Often people feel overwhelmed, and it produces a sense of helplessness and powerlessness in the face of how large the threat is. All of us being just, you know, an individual human, what can we as one person do, you know, to solve it? And of course, we can't reconcile it as individuals. We have to work together, but we do have very meaningful solutions and ways of making change when we take it seriously in collectives. So we have to find ways of helping people see that there is agency and that there are things that you can step into from any place where you're working, where you're living, where you're volunteering, where you're pushing your leaders to take action on this, where you're putting your money, investments, etc. And so the helplessness we feel is really a sham, and we have to do better at being able to work with these psychological defenses that are getting us to pretend ourselves away from the anxiety and pain of the problem and move towards some power to protect the future and prevent harm that will otherwise become truly catastrophic.
Because there are so many other societies of peoples who throughout history, their world has ended, and yet many of them are thriving now or surviving.
Yeah, I'm so glad you bring that up. You know, we give up on the history of resilience of many people, especially those living under oppressive forces, marginalization, whether we're talking about legacies of colonization, systemic racism, living under an authoritarian regime. I mean, people have had to deal with the existential threats that harm them throughout time, and now the climate crisis is creating an existential threat for everyone, even the most privileged and protected. And we can draw wisdom from that hard-won resilience of many groups that are still dealing with that, for which the climate crisis is just one more layer of trauma. And we need to find ways of gathering the strength and knowing that we only produce the hope when we get together and work on these things that hurt us.
Okay, and I love that the last little bit talks about you and your baby, aptly named Atlas. I love that.
Thank you. Clearly you've read the book. I really appreciate that.
And I'm going to end with a line that really stuck out with me, that better futures will be entirely missed if we get stuck in fear and dread. So yes, there is a lot to bring up in this book, but so much hope and so many ways to act. So Britt, thanks very much for joining us. Generation Dread, Finding Purpose in an Age of Climate Crisis is out now.